Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 4, Episode 19, The Junior Mint. Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing out there? How's everyone's rage level out there? Mine's been running in the red since, I don't know, about an hour after I posted the last episode of this podcast. You guys have to understand, after I'm finished with the podcast for the week, it's kind of this, relaxing time. I've done everything. I've kind of, it's an accomplishment for the week, and I just kind of chill out and enjoy maybe a little frivolous playing some games on my phone or watching an episode of a show. I don't know. I just try and kind of decompress after putting out the podcast. Well, that all got shot to hell last week, considering the horrific decision by our Supreme Court. I use Supreme in quotes now. They overturned Roe v. Wade. I'm sure all of you are aware of this. And, well, let's just say it's just another pile of shit on a huge shit heap of things happening in this country. And it's so disheartening. So I'm just, for the sake of my sanity and not making this entire episode about that, I'm going to talk about the one sort of, I guess you could call it a life preserver this week that has been the bright spot that I've been trying to focus on when I'm not in just complete and utter despair and fighting and figuring out ways to fight, because that's all that's been on my mind. But the bright spot this week that I want to acknowledge is that my son attended a really special basketball camp. It was called the Derek White Basketball Camp, and it was with an NBA player. Derek White, if you're not aware, and I wasn't aware until maybe a month and a half ago, he plays for the Boston Celtics, and he is from where we live in Colorado. He is a hometown hero, I guess you can say. And he comes back and does this camp every summer. And it's really touching. And he's such a class act. He's an NBA star. He was just in the NBA finals. It's pretty amazing. But he was there every single day, every single minute of this camp all week with the kids. They had special one-on-one time with him. They each got a photo. I mean, it was so special to my son. And I say this a lot, especially to people who ask me. Actually, it happened last week. In fact, that shoot that I was on, one of the actresses, one of my co-stars, she was saying, "Oh, well, me and my husband are talking about having kids. We're not sure. What's your take on it?" And it's such a tough question because, it's hard to encapsulate, right? In just like a casual conversation. But I have to say that one of my favorite things as a parent is being a witness to your kids' lives and seeing those moments that will stick with them forever. They're life-changing moments. And this was definitely one of those weeks for my son where I'm watching him and saying to myself, wow, he's never going to forget this. It was so special. The first day of the camp when Derek White walked into the gymnasium, the look on my son's face, and just his hand slowly went up and he pointed at him and he looked at me and the bleachers and his eyes were big. And it's just such a special thing to witness as a parent. And, that's what this whole week was for him. And today was the last day of the camp. He was really bummed that was the last day. Just a really great example, not just to get basketball tips from an NBA player, but just to see the character and these kids witnessing someone who's so incredibly successful as a professional basketball player coming back and not forgetting the community where it all started. And I think that in itself is such an important lesson. So I was just over the moon for my son this week. He was certainly on cloud nine, and it was a bright spot that I needed to kind of cling on to this week for sure. All right, let's get into this episode. The synopsis for The Junior Mint is as follows. Elaine visits an artist ex-boyfriend named Roy in the hospital and finds that his illness has improved his looks. George decides to invest in Roy's art, but the artist's full recovery lowers the value of the investment. Kramer decides to use wood-style wallpaper to give his apartment the feel of a ski lodge. Kramer and Jerry decide to watch Roy's operation. A junior mint they accidentally drop into the patient ends up saving his life. This episode was written by Andy Robin, and that is a newer name. We have not had an episode by Andy Robin. This was his first one. So we start out in Jerry's apartment. Jerry and George are chatting about a woman Jerry just met at the supermarket and made a date with. He met her in the provocative produce department, all the squeezing and smelling. Only problem, Jerry cannot remember this woman's name. George remembers and shares the news that he just got a call from the state controller's office. An old fund he used to contribute to as a kid accumulated $1,900 of interest, and so he's getting a check. Found money. He loves it. Kramer enters. Jerry has gotten him gloves from the supermarket because he's installing fake wood wallpaper. George has a copy of Home Alone and asks Jerry, "Can I watch it here?" "Why do you want to watch it here?" "Well, because if I'm out here, I'm doing something. If I watch it at home, it's like I'm not doing anything." Elaine buzzes. She, Jerry, and Kramer have plans to go to the health club. Jerry and Kramer want to play racquetball. Kramer comes back. He's super disappointed. "These are dishwashing gloves, Jerry. There's no fine touch. These are no good to me. I can't use them." Elaine enters, and the boys think they're going to leave, but she says, "Hang on, there's a change of plans." She tells them that Roy, the artist she went out with, "Oh yeah, you liked him. What happened there?" "He was just a little too artsy." "Fat." "Oh, he was a fat, starving artist. It's very rare." Well, anyway, Roy is in the hospital, and she feels like she wants to visit him. They agree to go with her. Kramer's excited. He might be able to get some better gloves. And then she asks Jerry, "Hey, would you mind maybe acting like my boyfriend?" She doesn't want to lead Roy on. She doesn't want him to think she's interested. And Jerry agrees. My take on this scene, clearly it's our setup scene. It's our first scene. Lots of setup here. Jerry met a woman at the supermarket. Can't remember her name. George has found money. And Kramer wants to redo his apartment to feel like a ski lodge. Elaine's fat, starving artist, her words, not mine, ex-boyfriend is in the hospital, and they're going to visit him. So here we get to meet fat-shaming, shallow Elaine. Okay, a new side to Elaine. Now, I definitely do not approve of the fat-shaming. Absolutely not. I'm not promoting that at all. But, and this might be a weird take, but just hear me out. I do want to call out that saying something like she says, like he was too fat, that is very much something you'd only say to your closest friends. We all have opinions we know we shouldn't really express to the general public. But if you're with those close friends, you're like, all right, this is the real deal. And there's a part of me who forgives that because I know I do it. I've got some opinions. I'm like, I'll only say this to you. I know you'll get this. So I feel like that's what she's doing here. And look, we all know that the main four, they're all shallow. And I also appreciate that for once, the female lead is allowed to be as shallow as the men are in a sitcom, because usually it's, the women have to be the fun governors, and you can't say that. You shouldn't do that. And there are Elaine moments like that. But somehow it's liberating that we see Elaine being shallow, just like the men are, because why the hell shouldn't she be shallow sometimes? We just saw Jerry being extremely shallow about, the implants of a woman that he's interested in. So, if Elaine has these feelings, she has these feelings. So next we are at the hospital. They enter Roy's room, and right away, Elaine notices that he's lost a lot of weight. And, well, we know from what she said that was the one thing getting in the way of their relationship. So she's pretty much instantly attracted to him. Jerry introduces himself as the boyfriend and tries to put his arm around her. She flings it off. I love that moment. Kramer is looking for gloves in the hospital. Then we see a short clip of George watching Home Alone. Back to the hospital room. Elaine is sitting on Roy's bed, and she's basically reminding him how fat he was. "I couldn't even get my arms around you." Yes, I remember. And she says, well, that's an advantage of getting sick. You get to lose weight. And Roy says, it wasn't because of that. It was because of her. He couldn't eat for weeks after she stopped seeing him. Get out! She shoves a sick man in a hospital bed because she's so flattered by this. Oh my gosh, I had no idea I had that kind of effect on you. She is in full-on flirt mode and even offers to take him out to dinner once he's out of the hospital because Roy is getting too thin. Then Jerry pipes up, honey, are we going to the Poconos next Friday? No, I think we are. Shut up. Kramer enters. He's got a bunch of gloves. He hit the mother lode. And then the doctor enters. Kramer, just inserting himself where he doesn't belong, asks the doctor if they're going to be using an inter-abdominal retractor. The doctor knows what's going on. Did you see the episode of 2020? Okay, well, listen, we are not going to be using that retractor on your friend, but you will be using a retractor. We have to. Ooh, Kramer doesn't have a good feeling about this. So the doctor notices this and says, look, you obviously care about your friend. Do you want to watch the operation? I have some students that are going to be watching it. Kramer, of course, is so excited to do that. My take on this scene, wow, we just keep adding fuel to Elaine's shallowness in this scene, and I love it. I mean, look, I'm here for it. Everything changes once she sees how much weight Roy has lost. And Jerry's still trying to act like her boyfriend is so fun. I love how she's trying to shake that arm off of her and tells him to shut up later. And the way Elaine is so flattered by the fact that it was her breaking up with him that caused him to drop the weight. That's just so delightful. I mean, we're just seeing Elaine being not only shallow, but just so just so narcissistic and making it about herself. It's I don't know. I find it delicious. I'm not going to apologize for that. I don't need my female protagonists to be all morally upstanding. Come on. That's boring. The get out shove, to have a get out shove applied to a man in a hospital, in a hospital bed about to have surgery. I don't think there's anything better than that. And Jerry's reaction in the background is so perfect. And just a side note, I love that shot where she's sitting on the bed talking to Roy and we see Jerry in the background. It's a really funny way to sort of present what's happening here. We got Elaine flirting with this guy who now she finds attractive because he's dropped all this weight, and then just Jerry in the background witnessing the whole thing. And particularly that moment when she shoves Roy and Jerry's face like, oh my God. JLD is so great in this scene. I love her whole demeanor when she's really laying it on thick with flirting with him and asking him out for a big meal. The way she says, because you're getting too thin. And then her turning to Jerry and telling him to shut up. It's so great. Perfect. Next, we are at Jerry's apartment. George is crying because he's gotten to the end of Home Alone. Jerry enters and sees this. He's disgusted by this display. Well, the old man got to me. I'm with you, George. That old man part is so touching. I get choked up every time too. No judgment here, George. And then George asks about Roy. Jerry bitches about how Elaine got all chummy with him, and now she wants Jerry to buy his art so that she and Triangle Boy can go to a bunch of fancy restaurants. Well, that's nerve. And Jerry says, you should buy it. You got $1,900. Yeah, that's what I need. A bunch of triangles. George is on his way out, says to have fun with what's-her-name. Then he points out to Jerry how embarrassing it's going to be for Jerry to have to ask her name. And he's like, no, I don't have to ask her. Well, how are you going to find out? There are ways. Next, we're at Jerry's apartment later, and Jerry's on the couch with his date. And so he's trying to do this thing. And it just occurred to me on this couch in the last episode when he was trying to get Sidra to admit whether or not she has fake boobs. This is yet another thing, Jerry trying to just pepper in little hints here and there to get some information. So in this instance, he's telling what's-her-name that kids always used to make fun of his name growing up. Jerry Dingleberry, sign smelled. And she says kids were merciless with her name. I mean, what do you expect when your name rhymes with the part of the female anatomy? I love how Jerry's like, what? She starts kissing him. Oh, Jerry. Oh, you. Classic moment. The actress who plays No Name is Susan Walters, and she's had a long career in many television shows and a lot of soap operas. I think she does a great job as this character. She will also come back in season 8 to reprise this role. And there's nothing overly comedic about this role, but she's very good in the episode. And I wanted to mention real quick, I know I talked about this in a very early episode of the podcast. For any of you new listeners, if you wonder why I always go over who the actresses are in the episode, it's because this podcast, it's an Elaine Bennis podcast, but I also like to highlight the other female actors in each episode. So it's just my homage to all the female talent on Seinfeld. All right, next we are at Monk's. George is trying to help Jerry out, rhyming every female body part he can think of to figure out the name. He's rhyming with breast, Hest, Celeste, and then saying basically saying a bunch of non-names. Bovary. Although Aretha, even men have a urethra, so that wouldn't have worked. Kramer enters. He says his date canceled on him, so he needs someone to go to the operation with. George asks what it is. Splenectomy. Isn't that when they... No, don't tell me. I haven't seen it yet. It's a great moment. Then George pipes up, Mulva. He's so sure of himself. Mulva? I don't think so. Then finally, Jerry agrees to go to the operation with Kramer. He's rushing him. Wait, let me just finish my coffee so I can go watch them cut this fat bastard up. Fantastic line. Next, we're at the operation. Kramer is getting annoyed because up in the operating theater, he really can't see. He's chomping on Junior Mints while he's complaining that the doctor's in the way of his view. Jerry asks where he got those Junior Mints from. From the machine. You want one? He refuses Kramer's offer to have one, but Kramer keeps insisting, like he won't let this go. It gets a little bit physical, and then the Junior Mint flies up into the air and into Roy's open cavity. Next, we're back at Jerry's apartment. Jerry's telling George what happened, that the Junior Mint went into the patient, literally. They didn't notice? No. How could they not notice? Because it's a Junior Mint. It's a little mint. Well, I mean, people eat pounds of those things. Yes, they eat them. They don't put them next to vital organs in their abdominal cavity. Elaine buzzes. Kramer enters and loves the wallpaper he's using. It's like a ski lodge in his apartment now. Jerry yells at him for forcing that mint on him. He says, I told you I didn't want it. Why wouldn't you believe me? Well, because Kramer can't believe anyone would refuse such a refreshing mint. And Jerry says, whatever you do, do not tell this to Elaine. Elaine enters. Prognosis negative. Prognosis negative? She says the doctors are baffled. He's not improving. And Elaine's, sad because he was just getting thin and attractive, just her luck. Elaine, on the way to the bathroom, tells Jerry, you should buy some of his art. It'll really lift his spirits. And then Elaine exits into the bathroom. And then George gets interested. It's that bleak. And he thinks about it. If he buys that art and the guy dies, that could really be worth something. Jerry is getting so stressed about this whole Junior Mint thing. He says, we got to confess. I can't do that. I can't live with this on my conscience. And Kramer says, no, you're not going to say anything. You're not. Elaine returns from the bathroom and George says, put him down for $1,900 worth of the triangles. And he's also drinking a ginormous glass of milk. What is with these people and drinking big glasses of milk? There's only one episode where Jerry calls that out because he looks at it after George pours it for, what am I drinking, milk? It's weird to me. My kids drink large glasses of milk because they're kids. I just don't understand why adults do this. So my take on this scene, there's really not a ton for Elaine here. Just that she shows more shallowness. Every scene with Elaine basically shows just how shallow she's draining more out of the pool, as she says to Jerry last week, with her line in this scene, just when he was getting thin and attractive. I do want to note that this is now the second significant other that George has purchased art from. First, we had Jerry's girlfriend, who plagiarized the whole Chapter 2 by Neil Simon, the squiggly lines lady, and now we have Roy, the triangle artist. So clearly George doesn't learn his lesson about buying art from from significant others of his friends. Next, we're in Jerry's apartment. No Name is giving him a massage, and he says, "Oh, that's terrific, Mulva." Mulva? Oh, my aunt's name is Mulva. She's a masseuse. No Name goes to the bathroom, and Jerry goes for her purse, trying to find an ID or something, but she comes back right away, asks what he's doing. "Oh, I was looking for some gum." "Oh, I have Junior Mints." "No!" So she goes back to the bathroom, and Kramer enters, asks if there's any news on Roy. And Jerry says, "No, but just stick around because I want you to introduce yourself to this woman. I don't know her name." Well, he tries. It doesn't work. He leaves way too quickly. She needs to leave. She's going to a play, and she might get to meet Olympia Dukakis. Well, there's a name you never forget. George tries to introduce himself as she's leaving. It doesn't work. Well, George got his triangles, and they really spruce up his apartment. He seems happy with this purchase. I do have to point out, George enters the scene with more videotapes. I think he's planning on watching more movies at Jerry's place. The top one on the stack is Pretty Woman. Jason Alexander played a big old asshole in that movie. I just wanted to point that out. He slaps Vivian, Julia Roberts' character. Not cool. Jerry, he just can't get this off his mind, so he's got to confess and help the guy. So he calls the hospital. George the whole time is trying to stop him. "Who are you to play God?" He's he's cheering for this guy to die so that his investment in his art will pay off. Well, Jerry gets on the phone with someone at the hospital and finds out, oh my gosh, he's totally fine. George is so pissed. $1,900 down the drain. So then we're back at the hospital. Roy is doing well, and he's telling George that him purchasing his art is what inspired him to get better. George, of course, is just like, "Yes, I'm looking forward to many years with the triangles." George exits, but not without a sloppy spaghetti sauce kiss from Roy, because Roy is just pounding this plate of spaghetti. The doctor enters and says there were other factors at play that saved Roy's life. Maybe something from above. Yeah, it was a Junior Mint. With a mouth full of spaghetti, Roy asks about his date with Elaine on Friday. Where are they going? You just see it on her face. She is so grossed out. She can see where this is going. He is just eating this food like there's no tomorrow. And yeah, he's going to get fat again. And we know Elaine's not going to like that. So she gets out of it. She says, I'm so sorry, Roy. We are actually going to the Poconos, right, honey? I don't think so. So Jerry's giving her a hard time, which, let's face it, Elaine deserves that. And so finally she's begging him, "Please, can we go? I'll think about it." And my take, again, we're just seeing fat shamer, shallow Elaine here at play again. It's just a running theme in this episode. She's clearly grossed out by how he's shoveling the spaghetti into his mouth. And also, side note, I love how the meal of choice is always spaghetti in this show to illustrate someone's disgusting eating habits. And it's been George only thus far, but now Roy. I think they just think, hey, we got to show someone eating something super messy. And it makes sense. Spaghetti, for the most part, is a pretty messy meal to eat, especially if it's swimming in sauce. Next, we're at Jerry's apartment. No Name is saying how much she loved the play she saw, and then she got to meet Olympia Dukakis, and she got her autograph. Wait, you got her autograph? Jerry asks to see it. And she gives him a hug. She thinks she's falling for him. And he's looking at the playbill and he's like, "I'm falling for you too, Joseph Puglia." She's like, "I had it autographed for my uncle." "I know." And she just figures it out. "You don't know my name, do you?" Of course I do." "What is it?" "Mulva." She just storms out. And Jerry's trying to guess as she's leaving. "Gipple? Loliola?" He shuts the door, and then it takes him about 2.5 seconds, and then he realizes it, runs to the window. Dolores! I will admit, I remember watching this episode real time and having no clue what the hell Dolores rhymed with. I mean, I definitely had learned what a clitoris is, but I was also like, what was it, 1993? I was like 14. I just didn't know. I didn't know enough to know, like, oh yeah, Dolores, clitoris. No idea. So I distinctly remember being in geometry class and people were talking about this episode. And my one friend, Kelly, she was very cocky. She's like, oh my God, I'd figured it out way before the end. Like, hello, it's Dolores. And then she was the one person I was like a little more comfortable with to ask. And I was like, well, what does that rhyme with? She's like, Shivani, clitoris. And I was like, oh, right. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, totally. Duh. And then I was like, what's a clitoris? Just another peek at how young and innocent I once was. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break and I will see you on the other side. The Supreme Court gives me the right to do that. Ugh. Nope. Not anymore, Elaine. God damn it. Last Friday, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, fulfilling not only Poppy's wish, but also moving guy Carl's wish, too. You know, someday we're going to get enough people on the Supreme Court to change that law. Just as Elaine did in that van, millions of us broke down in tears when we heard the devastating news that the government will now be able to regulate the very private choice of what we want to do with our bodies. If you are as outraged as I am, here are just a few things you can do to fight for reproductive freedom. Visit abortionfunds.org. This is the website for the National Network of Abortion Funds. This fund helps individuals connect with organizations that will assist in the logistical and financial help for abortion access. And donating to this fund means that your money will be split among 90 plus groups who help women all over the country gain access to reproductive health care. Again, that's abortionfunds.org, and you can see all the details, all the different organizations that your money would go to. You can also support pro-choice candidates. I am a true believer that change starts at the local level, so get involved in every election and do your research to find out what candidates believe in regards to reproductive freedom. Volunteer for them, donate to them, support them however you can. For me, I did a lot of postcard writing, I did text banking, I canvassed a couple of times. Whatever you can do to donate your time or money to these candidates to help them get elected. And then, of course, vote, vote, vote. Tell your friends and family to vote. Exercise that very important right to vote in every election. This midterm election in November will determine whether or not this awful decision by the court will become a federal law. Right now, it's up to the states, but if Congress is majority pro-life, it won't matter where you live in this country. Abortion will be banned under any circumstance. Any circumstance. Rape, incest, pregnancies that are not viable, that could be threatening to the life of the mother. It is inhumane. So make sure you vote this November and prevent pro-life candidates from getting the majority in Congress. And finally, the ACLU website, aclu.org, is a fantastic resource to learn how to get involved. They have been preparing for this moment for decades, so they have a treasure trove of information to guide you. If you're new to getting involved in this kind of stuff, they have a step-by-step process of what you can do to help, and it's for every type of help. You don't have to have a lot of money to get involved. It's just fighting for this reproductive freedom any which way you can. So the ACLU at aclu.org is a great resource for everything you want to know about getting involved. To quote another brilliant Julia Louis-Dreyfus character, Selena Meyer from Veep, "Get the government out of my fucking snatch." And if men got pregnant, you could get an abortion at an ATM. We must not give up. Fuck Poppy, Pequeno's Pizza, and moving man Carl, and everyone who doesn't believe in reproductive freedom. This isn't a time to sit back and be passive. Turn all of your rage and despair into action. I know I am. And we're back. Moving on to the extras of the episode, there was an inside look where they explained some of the original names they came up with before they decided on Dolores were Regina, Regina, Kitty, Titty Kitty, Chloris, which was supposed to be clitoris, chloris, and they weren't crazy about any of them. So an interesting story, the day they taped this episode, they asked the studio audience if a woman had a name that rhymed with female anatomy. What's your guess? What would that be? And a woman said Dolores. the people on the show loved that way better because I think they had decided on Cloris. And so they changed it. They changed it right before the taping. And that woman left the taping that day thinking she'd guessed the right name when she, in fact, gave them the idea for the name. I think that's pretty amazing. There was commentary for this episode. It was Jerry Seinfeld who did the commentary. He mentioned how people yell Mulva at him on the street a lot. That's an interesting one to yell out to someone. You see Jerry Seinfeld, you're like, Mulva. What? He was concerned that the whole Junior Mint plot, dropping it into the open cavity was way too out there. Because up until that point, they had prided themselves on making a show that was pretty grounded and, felt very real. But the risk paid off. In the Notes About Nothing, JLD talks about juggling motherhood and work. Now, to remind you guys, she had just given birth to her first son right before season 4. And she says, quote, I don't bring him to work when we're actually shooting, only when we're rehearsing, because I've got to get focused. Plus, I'm wearing makeup and lipstick. He'd get it all over his face, unquote. I thought that was pretty cute. All right, moving on to Contributor Corner. Greg sent in some thoughts this week, and he says, let me start by saying I don't like that Elaine broke up with Roy because he was fat. While it may be true, I'd like to think she wouldn't have dated him in the first place if that was an issue for her. However, I think they used that just as a way to justify the fat starving artist joke. Her renewed interest in him later could have been explained as, when they dated, he was gaining weight due to his laziness or something, which was why she dumped him. I don't know. I just think Elaine would be better than that. The blubber line was unnecessary. Oh, I didn't mention that. Yeah, she says that to him in the hospital. You were like blubber. Oh, yeah, that's not cool. Yeah, I mean, look, this is not an episode to see really kind or compassionate Elaine. And I stand by what I said earlier, where I'm like, look, females are allowed to be shallow sometimes. And I sort of love that they showed the lead female in a sitcom being as shallow as the men. It's an odd take, I realize, because I'm certainly not defending fat shaming in any way. It's not something to be proud of. But I'm looking at it through the lens of how it was rare to see this. And she's acting like a dude. And I'm kind of here for it. Why did she go out with him in the first place? That's a good question. If he was fat and that was an issue for her, maybe she was just trying to see past that. But as they were dating, she couldn't. I don't know. But I'm with you, Greg. I don't want to defend any sort of fat shaming. I'm not saying that's a good thing in our Elaine, but I support her shallowness, especially because we see it in the men all the time. Next, Greg says, when we do finally meet Roy, not to be superficial myself, but why are all of these guys who Elaine dates such duds? Putty I can see, Keith Hernandez, even the potential JFK Jr., but JLD at this point is in her early 30s, so what's with these lurches when she's a 10? Okay, he's in the hospital, but does he have to look like a balding caveman? Meanwhile, they pair Jerry and even George up with women that are way out of their league. I mean, yeah, this has been an issue since the beginning of television. I'm sorry. I've talked about it before, but it's like the honeymooners, all according to Jim, everybody loves Raymond. It's like every one of these dudes they somehow end up with women who are like you say, like they're 10s, and we're just supposed to believe that these women are going to go for that. It's just, yeah, it's annoying. I agree. And in fact, I'll jump ahead a little bit. The next episode's The Smelly Car. And the guy that Elaine's dating in that one, I'm sorry, like if Roy was too fat for her, like this guy's not in shape that she's dating. I'll get into it in that episode. But bottom line, yes, Greg, they're all like this. And this is what under the surface really does infuriate me about this show. Just the caliber of men that Elaine pulls, while somehow Jerry and George are pulling, like, remember, I mean, there's an episode where George literally dates a model, the one where he thinks that she's refunding or puking up her food. Like, how does that happen? Give me a fucking break. So, and you are being superficial, Greg. So You can call out Elaine and her fat shaming all you want, but this thought, superficial. I love you, Greg. Don't worry about it. Yeah, this is, it's an ongoing thing and it's super annoying. I read such a brilliant tweet the other day where it's like, she's a 10, but she thinks she's a 6. He's a 4, but thinks he's a 10, and they got married. It was just like this short tweet, but it's so true. And it's not only in TV shows. I think maybe the TV shows are conditioning women who are way better than certain men to think that like, oh, am I just supposed to end up with like a doughy dud of a dude because that's what I see on TV? Because I do see it in real life too. And I'm like, what the hell's happening there? All right. I'm being superficial now too. We are all superficial sometimes. Just let me have this, okay? I'm upset about a lot of stuff. So I'm just going to let out my superficial self and not apologize for it. Greg goes on to say, while not an Elaine scene, I love the discussion of Florence Nightingale and Clara Barton. I feel like we all learned who these women were in school, but have forgotten. I love the exchange. Susan B. Anthony, I think I'd have a problem with, followed by, yeah, I think you would. Cracks me up. That, along with, let's watch them slice this fat bastard up, are my favorite lines of this episode. Yeah, I totally skipped over the Florence Nightingale, Clara Barton thing. I mean, it wasn't an Elaine scene, so I didn't really go over it. And yeah, the slice this fat bastard up thing. Jerry Seinfeld does mention, because I think that was a late addition. I think he might have come up with that in rehearsal or something. But he was like, that was such an awful thing to say. What a mean thing for me to say. And he was actually surprised they included it in the final cut. Next, Greg says, the whole thing with Dolores is classic and a memorable Seinfeld bit. However, am I pronouncing the body part wrong? It's not like Dolores is pronounced Dolores. I don't even know what to say there, Greg. I don't know. Dolores, clitoris, Dolores. How are you saying Dolores, I guess? I'm not sure. I'm just going to say it's close enough. And I think that's why they went with it. And like I said, they decided on Dolores like 5 minutes before they started recording. So clearly it wasn't that thought out. Greg's next thought. Am I right in thinking the actor playing the doctor is the same one who later tells George that Susan died? Pretty sure it is. Also, isn't Prognosis Negative a title of a fake movie they see? I'm thinking there are a lot of Easter eggs in this episode, just like George carrying a Pretty Woman video when he was in that movie. All right. Yes, you noticed it too, Greg. Pretty Woman. Jason Alexander has a great performance of a shitty man in that movie. Yes, that doctor does come back. It is the same doctor who tells George that she expired about Susan. Yes, and you are correct about Prognosis Negative. That is the movie that they were trying to see when stupid Farfel was in Jerry's care. And apparently it's also the name of a screenplay that Larry David wrote. So lots of Easter eggs in this one. And Greg's final thought. This is one of the rare episodes where I think Jerry and Kramer are actually the funniest in the episode, as usually Elaine and George carry the comedy. George is barely used here except as a sounding board for Jerry's plot. Definitely. It's surprising, actually, what they give Jason Alexander in this episode and how little they give him. But yeah, I agree. Jerry and Kramer do sort of carry the comedy here. Thank you so much, Greg, for sending in thoughts this week. If you would like to send in thoughts for an episode of Hot and Heavy, please email me at elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com. My favorite Elaine moment, it has to be when she shoves Roy, just how inappropriate it is. And his reaction, the actor's reaction also adds to that moment as well. That sort of lean back with the hand on his chest. He kind of looks up to the ceiling. It's very funny. And my final notes of this episode, fat shaming shallow Elaine is fun to watch. You know, it might be cringy considering what she's standing for in this episode, but it's fun to watch. And of course, JLD has a very funny and solid performance. I already expressed how refreshing it is to see the female lead of a sitcom just be as shallow as the men, especially when the men, just like Greg pointed out, and I've pointed out before, they somehow score these 10s when Elaine has to date duds. I mean, in sitcoms, we usually only witness that stereotypical gender emotions when it comes to relationships. So it's refreshing. Even though Elaine's being an awful person in this episode, completely being an awful person, it's refreshing to see her be allowed to be this awful person so she can keep up with these boys, right? I do wish Elaine was also brought into Jerry's plot. I think that's a really missed opportunity for her to give some perspective about Jerry not remembering Dolores's name. I mean, at the very least, at least giving Jerry some shit for not remembering the name. There was just so much jammed into this episode and sort of like random things. And I think we could have easily swapped out just a couple of minutes here and there of Kramer's ski lodge stuff and George watching Home Alone. That could have easily been swapped out for Elaine somehow getting involved in the whole Dolores thing, because I think that would have been an interesting take. While she's being fat-shaming shallow Elaine, maybe she could have also given Jerry some shit about not knowing this woman's name. Hey, did you ever forget my name? Something like that. And I think that's all I can say about the Junior Mint. Thank you so much for listening. And if I'm going to give you any advice today, go back and listen to the ad of this episode. And please, please, please take some action and keep fighting for our reproductive rights. Because going back 50 years in this country, we can't accept that. Thank you so much for listening. And I will see you next time.